So, America recently celebrated its 250th Independence Day. Happy birthday, America. And Belgium, in a couple of days, is gonna celebrate its own national holiday on the 21st of July. And the two nations are gonna face off against each other in the World Cup just a few hours from when I'm filming this. So it seemed like a good opportunity for me to share one of my favorite little crossover episodes between the two countries' histories. Because, of course, Belgium didn't exist yet when America declared independence in 1776, but it did exist during the Belgian Revolution of 1830. Now, I'm not going to give a full run-through of the Belgian Revolution, but just to understand the necessary context, the Belgian Revolution of 1830 was really an outgrowth, in many ways, of the July Revolution that happened in France in the same year. During that revolution, King Charles X, the successor to Louis XVIII of the restored Bourbon monarchy after the revolutions and the Napoleonic Wars, had gotten increasingly authoritarian and absolutist in his rule and quickly got ousted by a popular revolt. This revolt, of course, sent shockwaves to the rest of Europe, including to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which had been dealing with its own discontents in its southern provinces, which would later become Belgium. The would-be Belgian revolutionaries were upset at the unrepresentative nature of Dutch rule and the imposition of the Dutch language on the largely francophone elite, as well as conflicts between the Protestant Netherlands and the mostly Catholic Belgium. To where in August of 1830, during a production of the opera The Mute of Portacy, riots broke out in the capital of Brussels and quickly spread across many other towns in the region. The leaders of this revolution quickly proclaimed a provisional government, say that 5 times fast, and tried to figure out what to do with the active revolution that had basically just fallen into their lap. Because the Belgian Revolution, like so many revolutions before or since, was a case of the revolutionaries knowing what they were against, the Dutch rulership, but not really being sure what they were for, what they were trying to build. At this point, it was clear that they were separating from the rest of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but what were they gonna become afterwards? There was talk of installing the Dutch crown prince to be the new king of Belgium. There was talk of annexing the country into France, because for decades Belgium had been part of France during the Revolution, and a small faction of radicals even dreamed of making Belgium into a republic. Now, republic was still quite a dirty word, being associated with the terror of the French Revolution. So during October of 1830, the provisional government sent a diplomatic envoy to Paris to figure out what kind of role France and the new government might play in the revolution, what kind of assistance they might be able to offer to the Belgian revolutionaries. Now, the Republican delegation of this diplomatic envoy paid a visit to one Marie-Joseph Paul Yves Roche Gilbert du Mortier, also known as
America's favorite fighting Frenchman!
the Marquis de Lafayette, or just to his friends. Lafayette earned the title of Hero of Two Worlds for his major contributions to both the American and the French Revolution. He was born into the French nobility, but his parents both died at a young age, leaving him a rich, wealthy, and ambitious young nobleman. He went over to America to support the Patriot cause in 1777 at just 19 years of age, and he earned his reputation during the Revolution by not just being a competent general, but having serious respect for the Americans and their cause. He famously became sort of an adoptive son to George Washington himself. After the American victory, he returned back to Paris, where he got involved in reformist efforts and revolutionary politics. His role in the French Revolution is a lot more muddled. I think one way to look at it is that he was probably like one of the top 3 most significant figures in the French Revolution to escape with his head intact and not in exile. He was a member of the National Assembly and helped draft the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen with a bit of help from his old friend Thomas Jefferson. He also became the leader of the French National Guard. But Lafayette was always more on the reformist rather than revolutionary side in France, His heart might have been that of a Republican, but when the revolution evolved into a more extreme and violent version of itself, he quickly fell out of favor with the old Revolutionary Guard and tried to escape to the Austrian Netherlands, later to be known as Belgium. But he got caught by the Austrians in 1792 and spent 5 years in prison, later being freed after Napoleon came to power. Lafayette stayed out of revolutionary politics during most of the Napoleonic era and the restoration of the Bourbons in 1815. Famously, he went on a big tour of the United States in 1820, and because he was so young when he first joined the War of Independence, he was now one of the only living figures to have actively participated in the revolution. And everywhere he went, places and towns and streets and parks were named after him. Lafayette this, Fayette that. But back in France, the restored Bourbons drifted further and further towards absolutism. So in July of 1830, when revolution again broke out in Paris, Lafayette quickly assumed a kind of leadership position, not because he was at the cause of the revolution or because he wanted to place himself in charge of it, but mostly to keep the revolution under control, to prevent it from spiraling out the way the revolution of '89 had. And that's why Lafayette supported not the creation of a new French Republic, but bringing to power the cadet branch of the Bourbons, the Orleanists, making the Duc d'Orléans the new king of France. And Lafayette's support for this new monarchy was critical, because he would not hand it out without a guarantee from the Duc d'Orléans that this new monarchy would respect basic civil rights in the way that the previous monarchy hadn't. It was not quite a full-on constitutional monarchy, but with Lafayette's Republican credentials, this new monarchy would be more easily accepted by the French people. And those revolutionary Republican credentials were really the reason why the Belgian Republicans, led by Jean-François Thielemann in Paris and Louis de Potter back in Brussels, asked Lafayette if he would consider becoming the president of a Belgian republic should they proclaim it. And so what were the odds that Belgium would end up a republic and Lafayette its first president? Well, I hate to clickbait and switch you guys, but the odds were basically zero. Not only was Lafayette in his 70s by this point, with a long, troubled revolutionary career behind him, and hardly in the mood to become the leader of a new country, but the real hardcore Belgian Republicans were in such a minority position because if Belgium declared itself a republic, it would just be unacceptable by the other major European monarchies. The word republic still meant chaos, terror, the guillotine, and in this revolutionary context, it would seem like a French ploy to further exert its power, to spread revolution and chaos in the rest of Europe like they had done during the First French Revolution. And Lafayette, despite of or even because of his Republican sympathies, was as aware of this as anyone else, and declined the offer. But then again, because Republicanism was such a fringe and possibly dangerous position, that also explains why in the uber unlikely case of a Belgian Republic, Lafayette would have made an ideal candidate to be its first president. Because, on the one hand, his revolutionary and Republican credentials were beyond question, but on the other, he had a lifetime of political experience showing that he was capable of working within the constraints of his time. If the Belgian Republicans had tried to elevate one of their own as the new leader of this Belgian Republic, it would have been just another revolutionary coup and would have gotten nowhere. If by some miracle Lafayette would have accepted, they would at least have an elder statesman known and pretty much respected throughout the rest of Europe at its helm. But unfortunately, the time and the political realities on the ground simply weren't there. So Belgium ended up with a constitutional monarchy instead. Which is fine, I guess.